Sometimes audience and critics have a very different response to a movie or a franchise, and it feels like that happens a little bit more often with the horror genre, probably because it's inherently a bit more niche and polarizing. So today I'm going to give you my picks for the top 10 times that critics and audiences have disagreed about a horror movie or franchise. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Let me know your top picks for the times that audiences and critics disagreed about horror movies and horror franchises. Which ones are most interesting to you? Let me know down below in the comment section. As we go into this, I had three things I want to mention real quick. First off, I wanted to give a big shout out to Cody Leach, who helped me compile this list and let me know about a couple of fun facts about a few of these movies. He's a big horror fan. You can check out his channel right up here. Second one on here, audiences and critics, they're not monoliths, they're very diverse groups. I'm not trying to lump them all together and say that there isn't any diversity inside of it, but I'm just commenting on some general patterns. This isn't science, it's not meant to be perfect, it's just fun and interesting. And let's get started. Kicking things off at number 10 is Final Destination. This clever horror franchise involves a group of people escaping death, then being chased by death who wants to kill them in elaborate fashion. And it was originally created by a couple of alumni from the X-Files. The franchise was an immediate success that turned into a franchise that currently has 5 movies, and as of even March this year, they're working on a 6th film in the franchise. At least 3 of the entries have a B+ cinema score, and so they've pretty well always been well received. Audiences have had fun with all of these big, gigantic, elaborate, contrived scenarios where people get killed in over-the-top gory fashion. However, critics have not been as kind to the franchise, with the first 4 films all having under 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. Oddly enough, the 5th film actually got like a 63%. It's the only one that's fresh, but for the most part, these movies have not been enjoyed by critics whatsoever. And in fact, Richard Roeper had this to say.
So I'm going to assign a number of letter grades to this movie. I give it an A for disgustingly effective use of 3D. I give it an F for being so stupid and for some of those excruciating performances. I give it a C overall as a movie, and I'm going to give it my first ever GBB for gross beyond belief.
Number 9, Resident Evil. This is one of those franchises that critics always hated. The original one has the highest Rotten Tomato score of them all with a 36%, and from there it only went downwards, dropping as low as into the teens for a little bit. While the original film came out and was only a moderate success, each new release ended up making more money than the previous film, except for the next to last one. So much so that the final entry in the franchise made 3 times as much money as the original did. So this franchise kept growing in momentum in a bigger audience, especially globally, despite the fact that critics were liking the movies less and less and less as it went along. Next up is Ari Aster's films Midsommar and Hereditary. Critics absolutely loved his technical skill and art house take on horror, giving his films an 89% and an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes, meaning they were widely loved and liked by critics. Audience, however, weren't quite sure what to make of them, and therefore one of them only has a C+ on Cinema Score, and the other one only has a D+ on Cinema Score. And generally speaking, anything below a B+ on Cinema Score is a bad score because it's measuring people that paid, they saw the trailer, and they went to go see the movie, excited to see it, and then they left the theater. And normally it's kind of weighted very heavily that people enjoy films when they do a cinema score on it. So a D+ is a horrible, awful cinema score. And this is a common thing that happens with A24 films. We'll talk about more of them later on, but something about the way they market their films appears to draw in the wrong crowd. There's no shortage of horror fans that love Hereditary and Midsommar, but that opening weekend crowd that went out to go see those films did not at all connect with what they were going for, and they did not deliver the experience the opening weekend horror fans. Number 7, Us. Jordan Peele's sophomore film after Get Out got rave reviews coming out of South by Southwest. It had a 93% from Rotten Tomatoes, with people praising both the home invasion aspect of it, the social commentary inside the film, as well as just the overall direction from Peele. Audiences went to go see it and were much more polarized than movie critics were. A lot of people were very confused by the final reveal and how the plot mechanics played out, the logic of it all. A number of people, myself included, felt the home invasion side to it worked really nicely, but as soon as it started to try and be beyond that, it started to crumble a little bit under its own ambitions. So this is one of those films that it seemed like one group of people saw it and they saw a masterpiece of a brilliant mind filled with symbolism and important, relevant messaging. And the other group of people saw a film that wanted to be brilliant, wanted to have amazing symbolism, wanted to have a great message, and just didn't quite get there, and thus kind of cheated the sides of the movie that did work. Then we have the Halloween sequels. Now, the original Halloween has pretty well always been accepted as a classic of the horror genre and one of the greatest slashers of all time. And then the 2018 follow-up to that film was also very well received by critics. Everything in the middle there, however, was not treated the same by audiences and critics. Big standout there being Halloween 2, a movie that fans of the franchise hold up as one of the best, and it only has a 30% on Rotten Tomatoes. Some of the other entries in there, in that kind of middle trilogy, 4 through 6, it drops down to 6%, 11%, absolutely destroyed by the critics who just did not like these movies. While at the same time, clearly there was an audience that loved these movies, loved these characters, and the continuation of not just Michael Myers, but also the Loomis character and the new characters that were added inside of it. This seems to be a great example. A bunch of these 80s slasher franchises that went on for years to this day have loyal followings of people that collect the memorabilia and everything, but that critics just never connected with the majority of the body of work. Bringing us into the top 5 is Teeth. Critics greatly appreciated its feminist spin on the genre and its ability to take all the tropes of the genre, turn them on their head in a funny way that also lent themselves for all of the allegory and messaging inside of the film. Audiences, however, were weirded out by a strange story about a girl with teeth in an interesting place that led to a story that could feel very heavy-handed in the messaging that it was going for and very literal at times in the way it decided to portray all of that. This led to a scenario where critics gave it an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes and the audience scores only a 45%. Now, certainly there's no shortage of audience members that did enjoy what they got to sink their teeth into, but in general, this was not the movie that audiences were looking for. Number 4 is A24 horror films such as The Witch and It Comes at Night. Now, I alluded to this earlier when I discussed Ari Aster's films, which are released by A24, but A24 is a studio that makes kind of these art house indie horror films that don't exactly play into what opening weekend horror films are frequently looking for, and the movies are marketed in a way that try and get butts in seats, and so they sell them as more traditional horror films than they actually are, and when people go see them, they don't get what they wanted and thus don't respond well to them. In the case of The Witch, it's only a 58% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and then when it comes to It Comes at Night, its cinema score is a D, which is an unbelievably bad score for a movie that critics say is very well made. And I think at the core of them, once again, the trailer sells it as something's going to come at night that's going to kill these people. And when you watch the movie, it's much more of a psychological thriller. It's all about the tension and the paranoia that the characters are facing. It's not about these creatures out there. And they marketed it as creature movie. Thus, people went to go see it waiting for these creatures to come at nighttime and start tearing people up. And that really isn't what the movie is at all. And so some of these ones, it's not even that it's a bad movie, it's that they marketed it to the wrong audience just to make cheap money while making a movie that was pretty well made. Real quick before I give you my top 3, remember to share your picks down below in the comment section. As I go into this, I'm not trying to wage a war between fans and critics. Technically, I am a film critic, but I'm really a fan at heart, and I just find this stuff interesting, so don't use this in any sort of cynical, negative way. It's just a fun subject to discuss. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, check out this playlist right up here where I've done a bunch of other audience versus critics videos where I talk about movies that audiences loved, that critics hated, or movies that critics loved and audiences hated. If you've enjoyed this video, there's definitely another one up there that you'll enjoy. In third place is Saw and the Saw franchise. The original Saw film is widely regarded as a 21st century horror classic. It kickstarted the careers of both James Wan as well as Leigh Whannell, who have become icons of cinema over the last 15 years. But even the original Saw film only has a 49% on Rotten Tomatoes. From there, it dropped below 40%, and some of them are below 10%. So while this is one of these iconic franchises, and especially the original one is very well regarded and respected inside of the horror community, it has never ever been a franchise that critics have had a soft spot for. In fact, Richard Roeper put the original Saw at number 8 on his worst of the year list in 2004.
But instead of a darkly intriguing story, Saw had a lingering, near pornographic approach to torture and dismemberment, topped off by a twist ending that defies all logic, even horror movie logic.
Our runner-up is The Thing. Actually, for this one, I'm gonna sit it out. I've got a special guest that wants to talk about it.
John Carpenter's The Thing might have the most interesting legacy of any film ever made. I mean, this is often considered one of, if not the greatest horror film ever made by many horror film fans. It's often regarded as by far the best remake ever made. You look at places like Bloody Disgusting and Fangoria, and even like Entertainment Weekly, this is always listed in top horror films of all time. A movie that has so much praise and has such a huge legacy. You go back, and it's shocking to find out that John Carpenter's The Thing was not only a box office bomb.
Our next film, The Thing, has already caused a lot of talk before it has opened. About 2 weeks ago, something very unusual happened to me. I began getting postcards at my newspaper office from readers telling me that John Carpenter's new movie, I guess they'd seen it in a preview, was one of the most disgusting films ever made.
But it was eviscerated by critics of the time. I mean, you had some of the most prestigious and respected reviewers of the time calling this movie vomit-inducing.
Serve notice that a lot of people who see it will be made sick by it.
I think that's probably an understatement. I would call this the barf bag movie of July. I have some problems with it.
It almost ended John Carpenter's career. I mean, when you talk about horror greats, like horror gods, the directors that would be on the horror Mount Rushmore, John Carpenter is one thing that will come out of any horror fan's mouth at some point in that conversation. And this movie, which is often debated as his best film, usually alongside Halloween, that almost ended his career. His best film almost ended his career to the point where he had to take movies that he honestly had no interest in doing. Movies that a lot of us fans love, like Christine and Starman and even Big Trouble in Little China, which is a pretty big one for his filmography, are movies that he really just took to kind of keep his career afloat after the gigantic blow that he took from 1982's The Thing. It's kind of hard to figure out exactly why this movie didn't find its audience or find the critical praise that it gets now back in 1982. Was it just far ahead of its time? Was it too much? Was it something to do with what was going on in society? Obviously, there was a lot of science fiction movies coming out that year that I had to compete with, one of which was E.T., kind of a big deal. Any of those factors could possibly be attributed to it, but when you think about a movie that is on so many best of all time lists now, and try to go back and make sense of why the polar opposite was the reaction when it first came out. It's a question that we might never honestly have our answer to, but I'll tell you one question that it does raise for me and probably raises for a lot of us movie fans. What movies now or in recent years have either been eviscerated by critics and or passed on by audiences that 20 years from now will be viewed as one of the greatest films of all time?
If you don't know, that was Cody Leach. You can check out his channel right up here. If you're a horror fan, definitely want to go check out his channel. But coming in first place is Friday the 13th. Of course, Jason Voorhees is one of the icons of the horror and slasher genre. Over the course of about 30 years, he appeared in over 10 films that just drew out crowds of teenagers that wanted to watch him kill teenagers. Now, we haven't had him in a new movie in over 10 years, but in that window of time, he's even appeared in a Mortal Kombat game where they wanted to find who's one of the most vicious film killers of all time. Jason Voorhees. Even my 8-year-old son, who was born 3 years after the last time he appeared in a movie, knows who Jason Voorhees is, and it's not because I'm watching Friday the 13th movies when he's around. He's just an icon of horror that everybody knows who he is. But critics have never really liked his movies. The original one actually has like a 63% on Rotten Tomatoes. Respectable enough. From there, it dips below 40%, and I mean, they're in the teens, they're in the 20s. Critics have always just brutally slashed at these films the same way that Jason Voorhees brutally slashes promiscuous teenagers while they're doing drugs. In particular, the fourth film, which one of the fan favorites that introduced Tommy Jarvis, was absolutely eviscerated by Siskel and Ebert.
And the sickest thing is, this isn't the final chapter, that's just an advertising gimmick. The ending clearly sets up a sequel, and what I want to know is, I wonder if they're going to be heartless and cynical enough to make the sequel, because why not? They've already taken the bucket to the cesspool 4 times for this sludge. I think the people who made this movie ought to be ashamed of themselves, and that's what I think.
That watching girls, and it's mostly girls again, getting stuck is entertainment. See, that's the pornography.
It's really sick.
So because the movies were so prolific and successful while universally panned and Jason so iconic, it comes in at number 1. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to check out that playlist right over there with more of my audience versus critic videos. Also, be sure to follow Cody Leach. Head on over to his channel. Let him know that I sent you there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.